In this Cwic Week episode, we are going to cover microaggressions, demons, and the Constitution. All right, so microaggressions. There was a lot of feedback on our episode on the email that was sent out by the church last week that included the term microaggression. And unfortunately, it wasn't just in the article. In the email, which is actually an article from the, Ensign from the Liahona, but it was also put into the title as well. There are a number of issues that are embedded with the idea of putting new language into communication. And this is new language. I ran a search on the website, on the church's website. There is no other reference whatsoever to the term microaggression. So this is the first one. I do think we're going to see many more of those in the future. But before we get into the actual language part of this and what that means, I wanted to go through, a listener had recommended the conference talk from Elder Bednar called "And Nothing Shall Offend Them." And this is a little bit more focused on the church and being offended at church, but this is what he said about being offended. He said, when we believe or say we have been offended, we usually mean we feel insulted, mistreated, snubbed, or disrespected. And certainly clumsy, embarrassing, unprincipled, and mean-spirited things do occur in our interactions with other people that would allow us to take offense. However, it ultimately is impossible for another person to offend you or to offend me. Indeed, believing that another person offended us is fundamentally false. To be offended is a choice we make. It is not a condition inflicted or imposed upon us by someone or something else. And that's the key with the idea of microaggression, right? I mean, to take offense to something, it's not that we're not sometimes justified in being offended. But with microaggressions, to drill down that far, to almost be looking for offense, or to have something trigger us that is unintended, is kind of ridiculous. It's not on the person giving the microaggression. It's on the person receiving it. It is their choice to be offended. Am I going to be a victim of an unintended statement, or am I going to be empowered with my own choice and my own agency? And the problem with the theory of microaggressions is that it always puts it on the person giving the microaggression as they are the ones that are inflicting something upon someone else. As if we need to be walking on eggshells in everything that we do all the time so that we don't offend someone. Now, I understand that there are offenses. I understand that some things should not be said and some things should be corrected. That's all true. But to move the onus onto the microaggressor, right, to say that they're the ones that are the oppressor, so to speak, and not on the person being offended is wrong, because you're automatically going along with so much of what's happening with critical social justice in creating victims. It's like we're looking for new ways all the time to have new victims and to have new oppressors. And as Elder Bednar says here, this is a choice. And we should be teaching our kids that. It's a choice to be offended. How are you going to handle this? Society seems to be wanting to flip this whole relationship on its head. Of course it does. Here are a few comments on that episode. One is, when I first saw the church's email related to the topic, microaggressions, at hand, my heart sank a little and I felt a surge of frustration. Language and choice of words are vitally important. I appreciate you addressing this topic. So again, I do think it's vitally important. I think it's clearly something we need to look for and be very careful about the type of language that is going to be entering into communication. And unfortunately, I don't see any way around this language entering into church communication. I hope we can keep it away from the pulpit. I hope it stays away from there. But as it moves out of academia into the broader culture, which it is exactly where our culture is now coming from, primarily, is from academia, and our language, therefore, then I think it's going to be a very difficult thing for the church to hold off from that. Here's another comment. He who imposes terminology imposes ideology. I think that's true too. So as the language enters into pop culture, as it enters into the church, you have to see a word as everything that goes along with it. There are definitions that go along with that already, and ideas and ideology that go along with it. And they can act sometimes like a virus, right, is being inserted into the communication. And that's my concern. Our second topic is demons. I did an interview this last week with Dan Ellsworth on an article that he wrote called Understanding Demons. For me, I put a little question mark on the end of it. What do you mean understanding demons? And his point was that we need to understand what they are saying, and we need to understand their agenda. And that really this is something that carries on from the war in heaven and what we understand from that in the words of Lehi and in the words of John in the book of Revelation. But what I found fascinating about his article and his comments in the episode were his take on the temptations of Jesus, those three temptations, which was physical necessity, the bread, right? Anything that is you could crave physically was the first one. The second one was fame, basically, and recognition. And the third was a ploy to see if Jesus would react to be given power, right? So physical necessity, fame, popularity, and recognition, and also power, those three things. And he tied that together, which I had never heard before, with the Sermon on the Mount. And looking through the Sermon on the Mount, as he sees it, is a response to these temptations that happened to him. And I do think we need to focus more on that event. Because when you see things early on, like, for example, in reading the Book of Mormon, you go in early to the Book of Mormon, and what you're really looking at is a reaction from the Lehites to what was going on in Jerusalem. So you can get a much better idea, not only of what is happening in Jerusalem, from the words of Lehi and Nephi, and Jacob, especially those three. But you also can understand more what was going on in Jerusalem and then go to the Book of Mormon and see more of the meaning and the context of the words that they're giving us. And it's the same thing with the New Testament. Look at what happens early on there. If we look early on to the early events of the baptism of Jesus and to the temptations of Jesus, we can kind of see this launching, right, of teachings and reaction to what those early events were. I also love the fact that he brought up Marx and Foucault, right? And I think that one of the points I was making in that episode was that you need to look very closely at the DNA of ideology. When you look at certain ideologies, whether it's Marxism or Nazism or critical social justice, you should look at who has formed these things and what their overall character and teachings have been. That's important to see. What is the sourcing of these things? If you look at Marx and Foucault and Derrida from postmodernism, and you look at Marcuse from the Frankfurt School, who was so influential in the 60s and 70s, Angela Davis and Kimberly Crenshaw with critical race theory, go back and look at these individuals that came up with these ideologies and philosophies, these practices, because there's not a very pretty picture painted around these people. These are people that are typically very bitter. These are people that do not hold a lot of esteem for things like family and principles that you and I would probably hold up at a much higher level. It's important to see those things. I see all these, especially these younger generations, going out and grabbing onto these radicalized ideas found in critical justice with Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo and Kimberly Crenshaw, that are founded on these principles that are completely anti-gospel, completely anti-family. And yet they're not going back and looking at who these individuals are and why they had these thoughts. What inspired them to come up with these ideas and these ideologies? That's a real important piece of the puzzle. Lastly, I did an episode, just a commentary on President Oak's talk in General Conference earlier this year in April on the Constitution, the need for the Constitution. The title of the talk is Defending Our Divinely Inspired Constitution. And this is really a plea not just to the citizens of the United States, right? This is for everybody, for all members, and for the world, that we should be defending the divinely inspired Constitution. And I think that this is very appropriate. Listen to what I'm saying. I think it's appropriate. I think it's very appropriate, though, that in this time, as he says, he opens up early on. He opens up at the beginning of his talk saying, in this troubled time, I have felt to speak about the inspired Constitution of the United States. Something is coming to him, right? That he's got the Spirit kind of kicking him a little bit and saying, look, you need to talk about the Constitution. And I think we all need to. We all need to go back to that Constitution and that document and understanding of its inspiration and why it is inspired. And then understand that there are movements and ideas that want to tear down the Constitution, either parts of it or the whole thing. They want to demonize the Constitution. You look at this, the 1619 Project, look at critical social justice, anti-racism with Ibram Kendi and critical race theory. They want to break down the Constitution. So of course he needs to talk about this. And that's another thing that is, apart from looking at the DNA of these ideologies, the individuals that have come up with these thoughts and put them forward through academia, typically, we also need to look at, well, what are they against? What are they fighting against? That's a barometer. It's not that the Constitution is perfect. There are amendments that need to be made of it, but when you're going after the whole idea of the Constitution and freedoms and liberties that are protected and human rights and the divine inspiration of that document, then that ideology should come into quite a bit of suspect thinking and critique. And that goes from any ideology that comes from any end of the political spectrum anywhere.